Hello, students. We are going to continue on in our Chapter 7 notes and Lesson 3, a new plan of government. So we'll begin under the Constitution's sources in our text and specifically under the heading Federalism. And number 1 says, the Constitution created federalism, define it. So the Constitution created a federal system of government that divided powers between the national or federal government and the states. In the Articles of Confederation, the states held most powers. Under the Constitution, the states gave up some powers to the federal government and kept others. Federalism, or sharing power between the federal and state governments, is one of the key features of the United States government. Under the Constitution, the federal government gained wide-ranging powers to tax, regulate trade, control the currency, raise an army, and declare war. It could also pass the laws that were necessary and proper for carrying out its responsibilities. This power would allow Congress to make laws as needed to deal with the new situations. So, Constitution created federalism, and again, our highlighted terms, when you click on them, you'll see the definition. So sharing power between federal and state governments. Now, we will use this term a lot, and we've already used it a little bit, federal. Federal means national. So if we're talking about something that's federal, that means that it includes every single state. If it's national, every single state. So we have our federal governments, and then we have state governments. So the state government obviously is going to make decisions just for that particular state, and then the federal government will make decisions for all of the states. So our next question, what were the federal powers under the Constitution? I've started a bulleted list for you in your notes, so you'll just be able to add the item and then push enter and it'll create a new bullet for you. So the federal powers under the Constitution, that was already in this paragraph. The federal government has powers to tax, regulate trade, control the money. The currency is what the text says, but remember, currency is money. Raise an army. So that means to build an army, to create one. Declare war. And then also pass necessary laws. So some of these are powers that were given in the Articles of Confederation as well. But these are things that the federal government has the power to do. And they can put these in place for all of the states. So in addition to that, then, we need to talk about what state powers were under the Constitution, because that's what we're talking about here, is that sharing of power between the states and the federal government. We need to still work together. So I will continue to read. The Constitution left some important powers to the states. The states kept their power to control trade inside their borders. They also could set up local governments and schools and establish marriage and divorce laws. So we'll go ahead and put that information in. It's most of that paragraph there. So they can regulate trade within their state, which means set up the regulations. They can establish local government and schools. And they can set marriage and divorce laws. So you'll find state to state that they have different rules or laws regarding these things. So school rules or laws are different state to state. Marriage and divorce laws are different state to state. Number 4, what shared powers do state and federal governments have? I will continue to read. The Constitution also called for the sharing of some powers between the federal and state governments. Both federal and state governments would have the power to tax and to establish criminal justice. So they both have the power to tax and establish criminal justice. So to establish criminal justice means that they will determine what kind of punishments are given for people who are found guilty of particular crimes. Number 5, what were the supreme laws of the land? While the states had certain powers and shared others with the federal government, the Constitution and the laws of Congress were to be the supreme laws of the land. No state could make laws or take actions that went against the Constitution. Federal courts would settle disputes between the federal government and the states on the basis of the Constitution. So the supreme laws of the land. So first of all, I want to just kind of quickly focus on a couple of things here. And the first one is supreme. And then the second one is land. So to be supreme means the highest, okay? So most often, especially in government, we talk about the Supreme Court, which means that is the highest court in our country. It's the Supreme Court. And then here, we're talking about of the land that we're referring to is the United States. Okay, so the highest laws of the United States, that's what we're asking here. And there's actually 3 supreme laws of the United States or supreme laws of the land. But right now we're going to just focus on 2 of these. And the number 1 is the Constitution. And then the second one is federal laws, which are laws that are passed by Congress. And then again, remember that this is laws that apply to every single state in the country. So no state can make a law or take an action that goes against the Constitution. So if a state comes up with a law, it cannot go against a federal law. They can make it stricter, but they cannot make it more lenient. So I'm going to give an example here that I feel like it's an easy example to give. So let's say that the federal government created a national maximum speed limit, okay? And so, and they say 65 miles per hour is the maximum speed that you can travel in any state legally. So they can make a law in their particular state, and let's just say Illinois, okay? So Illinois can say, ooh, 65, that's a little fast for us. So we're gonna say in Illinois, the maximum speed that you can travel legally is going to be 60 miles per hour. So our law in Illinois would be stricter than what the federal government says. And that's okay, they're allowed to do that. What Illinois could not do is say 65, we could go faster than that. Let's make our speed limit 70 miles per hour, okay? That is something that they would not be allowed to do. They cannot go against the federal laws or against the Constitution. And that's what that would be doing. Now, like I said before I gave that example, that's not a thing. The federal government does not have a national speed limit in place. That's something that the states do get to decide. And you will find that there are states that have a 65 mile per hour speed limit. There's some that have 70. There's some that have an 80 mile per hour speed limit. Illinois, I believe 70 is the highest that I've seen in Illinois. but I could be wrong on that. Okay, so that's an example of those being the highest laws. They cannot go against a law, a federal law, or against the Constitution. So that takes us to number 6. And our answer is federal courts. And this is going to be in that same paragraph. So our answer is federal courts. And let's see, where is it that we talk about federal courts? It's right here. Federal courts will settle disputes between the federal government and the states on the basis of the Constitution. So what are the federal courts doing? They're settling disputes between federal government and the states. So we need to put that in our question as who will settle disputes between the federal government and the states. And that will be our federal courts, our national courts. And again, this was something that the Articles of Confederation did not include. And this is something that's important for us to have in our Constitution, is a way to settle disputes between states and between the federal government and states. Our next heading is the new government structure. The text just says government structure. And our first question here is, how is the federal government divided? So I will begin to read. The framers of the Constitution used Montesquieu's idea of a separation of powers. They divided the federal government into 3 branches: legislative, executive, and judicial. The first 3 articles or parts of the Constitution describe each branch's powers and responsibilities. They detail the methods for electing or selecting key members of each branch. So, how is the federal government divided? And they divided the federal government into 3 branches: legislative, executive, and judicial. So now we're going to learn about each branch of government. Maybe you've learned a little bit about the branches of government in elementary school. It depends on, who your teacher was, and what school you went to, and how much social studies they taught you. But it may have been in 5th grade that you learned a little bit about the branches of government. So number 1, what is the legislative branch? And for each one of these, we're going to include their duty, which means this is what their job is, their main job. They actually have more than one, but we first talk about their main jobs, and then we talk a little bit more about other things that they have the power to do, and then who is included in these branches. So you'll see also that your notes are split up similarly to the way that mine are, where you have a line that says duty, so you're going to follow and put that information in. And then for the who one, you have that separated into 2 boxes for the legislative branch, because we have 2 houses that we're going to be talking about. So Article 1 of the Constitution declares Congress to be the legislative branch, or lawmaking branch of the government. Congress is made up of the House of Representatives and the Senate. The powers of Congress include establishing taxes, coining money, and regulating trade. So the duty of this branch is, here it tells us, this is the lawmaking branch. So they have the job to make and pass laws. So I'll accept this answer in a couple different ways. You can write it exactly how I have it, make/pass laws. You could write it just as make laws, or you could write it just as pass laws. Any of those I will accept from you. So the who of this, and we already talked a little bit about it when we looked at the Virginia plan and the New Jersey plan and the Great Compromise. And that is, the 2-house legislature is going to be made up of the House of Representatives and the Senate. And together they are called Congress. So now for your notes, in the first box, you're going to write House of Representatives and then put a little plus sign. And then in the second box, you're going to write Senate and then do an equal sign and write Congress. This is, I like to call this the little equation to help us remember that the House of Representatives and Senate together are called Congress, and they are our lawmaking branch of the government. And then you're going to go back and you are going to put some information under the House of Representatives in that same box. And this is something that we've already learned about as well when we did the Great Compromise, that in the House of Representatives, the number of representatives is based on the state's population. And this is all stuff that you are going to need to know. So we're going to probably talk about it and write it several different times, several different places. And it's important that you know what it is. So then in the next box where you wrote Senate, underneath that, you're going to write that they have 2 representatives per state. So that means that it's based on equality. And that was what was agreed upon in the Great Compromise. Okay, and then we have what is the executive branch? Article 2 of the Constitution sets up the executive branch to carry out the nation's laws and policies. At the head of this branch are the president and the vice president. A special group called the Electoral College elects the president and vice president. Voters in each state choose the electors who make up the Electoral College. Okay, so first of all, our executive branch is going to carry out the nation's laws and policies. So I reworded that a little bit here. Carry out laws passed by Congress. And so these are federal laws that they create. And then for who is included in this branch, we have 2 that are given in the text, but we're actually going to add another group in there. So we have the president and the vice president. And then we also have a group that's called cabinet. And these are the president's advisors. We're going to talk a lot more about the president's advisors as we move forward. But a couple examples of our cabinet members are Secretary of State, Secretary of Defense, Secretary of Education. There are 15 cabinet members that we'll talk more about later. But these are people who are specialists in that area. So someone who knows a lot about education and its policies is going to be that Secretary of Education and is going to advise the president in those matters. Because the president, although, we like to think our president is a very smart person and knows a lot about what they're doing, they don't know everything. Nobody can know everything. Nobody can be an expert in every level. Especially, let's think about the Department of Defense. If our president doesn't have military experience, they're not going to have a lot of knowledge in that area. So they need to have someone who has a lot of military experience and has, been in the military for a long time, has worked themselves way up in the ranks and knows how to deal with hostile situations and how to deploy our soldiers and that sort of stuff. So then number 3, who elects the president and the vice president? So VP is for vice president, okay? And that is a special group called the Electoral College. That is who elects our president. Now, so many people think that it is the citizens who do that. And the citizens play a large piece of this, but they are not the ones who actually have the final say in who becomes president. If you paid attention to this election, this past election, then you would have seen a lot of information about the Electoral College. They just counted up those electoral votes or certified those electoral votes on January 6th, the day that there was the riot at the Capitol. So that's when it actually became official, even though we knew for some time that Joe Biden was going to become president, wasn't official by the standards of the government until January 6th, once they certified all of those votes. So it's the Electoral College is the name of the thing, we'll call it. And then electors are the people who are part of the Electoral College. Now, this is not a college. It's not a school. It's not a university. That's just the term that's used for this group of electors. And we're going to talk a lot more about the Electoral College moving forward. It is kind of a tricky topic to understand, but we'll spend some time getting to understand the basics of it. Okay, so then we have number 4, what is the judicial branch? So Article 3 deals with the judicial branch or court system. The nation's judicial power resides in one Supreme Court and any lower federal courts Congress creates. The Supreme Court and other federal courts hear cases involving the Constitution, federal laws, and disputes between states. So This one doesn't specifically give us the duty straightforward. So one thing that we've mentioned before is that the job of courts is to settle disputes, right? They're going to decide when there's two or more parties that are going against each other. They're going to listen to both sides of the story, and then they are going to make a decision. But in addition to that, and this part is maybe even more important than that, they are going to determine if laws are constitutional. Okay, so we need both parts of that answer here. They settle disputes and decide if laws are constitutional. And if they decide that laws are not constitutional, they will get rid of them. So who makes up this branch? Well, it tells us right away that this is the court system. Okay, so court system or system of courts. If you would rather, you could say courts and judges. Because a court system isn't necessarily a who, but a judge is a who. So I will take a few different answers for that question as well. But court system is the general answer. That's the easiest, I think, to put in there. And then we have checks and balances. And our question is, what is checks and balances? The Constitution contains a system of checks and balances. This means each branch of government has ways to check or limit the power of the other branches. With this system, no single branch can gain too much power in the government. You'll learn more about this system in another chapter. And we're going to actually spend another couple days just looking at checks and balances. So once again, we've got this highlighted that we can click on. And there we go. And I'll move that over a little bit. A system by which each branch of government limits the powers of other branches. So I actually am going to have us write it a little bit different than that. So each branch checks or limits the power of another so that no one branch can have too much power. So remember we talked about not wanting to have one person or just a few people having too much power. We also don't want one branch of government to have too much power. And so I had mentioned before that we create this way to balance between the different branches of government, that one branch has specific powers that another branch will have to be able to limit them on, that you can't just make decisions without having the approval or guidance of another branch of government. And as mentioned, we'll talk more about this as we move forward as well. And that's where we will pause in lesson 3 for today.